Welcome to a CNBC panel special. My name is Arnold Kwizera, coming to you from Kigali, Rwanda. Now, today we are having a very interesting conversation. And why is it interesting? It's because the future of work, as we know it, is going to change. And now, there have been talks, especially led by the World Economic Forum, in regards to work being very STEM-centered. But is it that really going to happen? Or is the current COVID-19 pandemic helping to accelerate the way we function and the way we look at work? Now, joining us is a panel of experts across diverse fields, from polytechnic to education and to the human resource department, who are going to break it down for us in regards to how work will be. Now, introducing this panel of experts, first of all, is the CEO of Kepler. She's called Natalie Munyampenda, here in Kigali, Rwanda. We also have the Managing Director of ITM Africa, Iris Irumva, and the Vice Chancellor of Rwanda Polytechnic, Mr. James Gashumba. And I want us to start with understanding what has been the impact of COVID-19 in regards to the current workplace. And I want to start with you, Natalie. What are some of the lessons that we could pick from COVID-19 in relation to how employers and employees should be working?
Well, I think the pandemic has made it clear that you need to be ready to work from home. You have to have some contingencies about being able to be productive, whether in person or not. And overall, I think it's made clear the type of skills. We keep talking about the future of work, but I think the pandemic has made it clear that the future of work is here. And what we need from graduates or employees is more than just being able to do the task before you, but being able to innovate, to analyze, to adapt. And those are the type of skills that higher education institutions like my own have to be making sure our graduates have before they leave our doors.
Iris, as an HR professional, what are some of the lessons that the current workforce should pick from the current climate?
Thank you, Arnold. I think in terms of human resources, we realize more and more that there is a culture shift and mentality towards doing the work in an agile way. And we need more employees to be engaged and to be adaptable and to be curious and to stay ahead of the challenges or changes that come at the workplace. So of course, we realize together with many employees with whom we work together that we need to do more change management trainings to be able to tackle the challenges that we face. One thing we know for sure is that change is inevitable. So if change is inevitable, we need to be able to adapt. And in terms of adaptation, we need all parties of stakeholders to be involved, so that being employers or employees, we can all bring in our capacities and a willingness to change for the better. Thank you.
Bringing into the conversation, Mr. James Gashumba, skill sets needed for this new normal, and especially for the people in a polytechnic area. What has been the impact on the people in your field?
Thanks, Arnold. COVID-19 is a rude awakening, really, for us. There are many things that we are very aware were coming, but the change has been hastened by COVID-19. For us in education, we knew we had to migrate to online learning for using ICT as the resource, for embracing what we knew was coming as fourth industrial revolution. But really, we were kind of laid back, saying, yeah, it will come. But COVID-19 said, I'm here, and your way of thinking must change. And we have to change the ways we teach. And we have also to make sure that our youngsters have the skill sets for the future, which is knowing that really knowledge is at your fingertips, and the source of knowledge is no longer the teacher. The source of knowledge is the resources that we have at our hands, which is the World Wide Web. So our teaching methodology is changing very rapidly. Our students came back last week. We are in our second week, and they are ready to embrace. Really, young people are always ready, or more ready to embrace new changes than us, the older people in administration. So I'm glad that in a way, this is an outcome of COVID-19 that I'm glad about. Other things, of course, they are not welcome, but yes, the skill sets, fourth industrial revolution is here with us. We have to change to embrace what is in our hands now. Thank you.
Mr. Kashumba, you're talking about a need to change and evolve, and if I'm to pick rightly, so you're talking about a mindset change. But some experts believe that is just a smaller challenge. There is a bigger challenge, which could be the increase in the education inequality gap across the spheres from the haves and the have-nots. And I want you to comment on that and the possibility of that happening.
Yes, we are very much aware, and that's not theory, it's in practice, and we have already seen it. Since March, when the students went home, we started putting resources online. We were very, very mindful that only probably a small fraction, and this could be as little as 30 or 40%, would have the capacity to access the resources. So the haves and have-nots is a problem we know we have. We are working very closely with UNESCO and with a couple of institutions, among which is UNESCO IITE Center and Huawei and what they call Wydong Cloud Education, all brought together by UNESCO. And we are trying to wrestle with this problem. And here at home, we are going to be working closely with Carnegie Mellon University. We don't want to fool ourselves that yes, technology is here, we can use it. We know there are haves and have-nots. We still have many youngsters who cannot have access to a computer, leave alone the internet. But where there is a will, there is always a way. And Rwanda is a nation that never fears the challenge. We are going to wrestle with this challenge and grapple with it and succeed. Thank you.
That's a little bit philosophical coming from someone who heads TVET-centered education system. I want to bring another education expert who's on the panel into this conversation again. Natalie, Vice Chancellor Gashumba is talking about giving the way that they think that gap can be bridged. But the education gap has been on the rise between the haves and the have-nots in sub-Saharan Africa. Actually, experts put it at about 27 to 28% within the last 5 years. Now, with education moving online, the infrastructure tools needed, access to internet, computers, how can we ensure that that education gap doesn't increase?
Yeah, I think it's a standing challenge for all the countries on the continent, and I would argue even across the world. The pandemic has really put an emphasis on the inequality in education, and particularly quality education. But I would argue that the discussion should focus more on how do you avail various pathways to education, whether it's technical education, whether it's degree programs, whether it's upskilling, whether it's a transition from secondary school immediately into employment through shorter courses. I think there has to be a culture shift around the value that we offer all opportunities that people get to train or to get formal education. That's the first thing. And I think that we also have to talk about the infrastructure and the access issues up front. So for example, our students were not interrupted with the pandemic, except the very beginning, obviously, because they were shifting from a campus to their houses and productivity levels dipped. But in general, they had access to a self-paced degree online. And that's something that we in partnership with an American university, so that continued and they were able to continue their studies. But we also acknowledged, as we're seeking local accreditation, that we were already planning to have a blended programs, and now we've had to really think about the non-blended parts. How do we make sure that those parts are also blended in case we continue to offer this online? And how do we offer shorter certificates and shorter programs online so that people can study from where they are? But again, for us, we built in to the price of our education includes a computer, it includes airtime for those during this pandemic at least. So I think that these things have to be built in ahead, and we have to think about how do we respond to these challenges from the very beginning, and also how do we offer various pathways. I think in the future we have to be able to have blended institutions where people come in for shorter times, they come in for a degree program, and we have to also change societal mindsets that degrees are not what's important. If you look at the skills coming out of the World Economic Forum and other discussions that are going to be required, complex problem solving, technology use, social influence and leadership, all these other, these core skills, lifelong learning, these are things that people are going to be doing outside of university settings. So we are challenged as higher education institutions to think about to redefine for ourselves what is the value of education or training. Are our graduates job ready? Can we track this? And as well as, are we nimble and agile enough to adjust and make education affordable enough so that people are able we can cover the equity issues?
Iris, bringing you back into the conversation, the skill sets that were needed at the beginning of this year are not necessarily the core skills needed right about now, and definitely will not be the core skills needed in 2 months' time or 3 months' time when we potentially get a vaccine or in a post-COVID-19 world. What do you think are the core skill sets that the people like Natalie and James are educating should have?
Thank you, and this is really a critical question because Natalie just pointed out in a few that education system has to be challenged, and I agree totally because in a day we meet hundreds of graduates or employers as people are seeking to get into the job market, and one of the things that we realize is that not always does education prepare them to tackle the challenges at the workplace. So I'm really glad that this conversation is coming up and that the education, people in the education system are realizing more and more that they need to marry the technical skills and the core and the soft skills. Some of the soft skills that I believe are definitely important nowadays is definitely adaptability. We realize that with change that has to happen often, we need to be more adaptable. And another thing that I realize is more and more important, and that employers even should be keen on when they're trying to hire new staff, is teachability. Are people, are new students teachable? How do they grasp new skills that they learn? Are they willing to not only listen, learn, and take on and even transfer the knowledge? So I believe if people are adaptable, they have the tenacity to work hard, because now the challenge again is that we see, I like to tell young people that things don't happen in a second. And change takes time, and for things to happen, it takes time. So we have to be enough. We have to have tenacity to go through and to persevere, even when we have challenges such as COVID, and not to give up. I think in the young generation, there's a lot of there's losing hope that maybe jobs are going to scare. But I'm glad to say that even during COVID, an organization such as ours that's purely focusing on human resources, we still had companies coming to us and saying we need this type of personnel, and we were able to place around 30 people just during this 3 months of COVID. So employment is still going to be there. We need just people who can think outside the box. Natalie talked about it in a few, talking about being able to think of creative problem solving. And this often happens when everyone is willing to bring in their ideas on the table and not being afraid that it's going to be a mistake, but rather thinking, I have an idea, and if I bring in my idea, someone else can build it on, and then it's going to be the best creative idea possible. So we need to challenge ourselves to be not afraid, but to stand on our ground and say, we have something to offer and we can give it.
Iris, to also pick from what you're saying, largely you're talking about a mindset shift. And if we talk about a mindset shift, which also the Vice Chancellor hinted about, how do we get about, because there's no class for changing your mind. There are books on changing your mind. So how do you ensure that people are proactive, or the new labor force, the new people being educated, coming out of the varsities, colleges, have a mind shift? And I'll start with you, Iris, and then Natalie, you can jump in after her.
I believe it's a progress, and lots of things that we learn in school or is not necessarily what we see on the job. So there has to be room to fail, to do, to have mistakes and learn on the ground. So what I would say is, of course, there are books out there, and it's possible to learn these skills not from far. We have colleagues, we need to learn from each other. We need to also learn from mentors. I've been really advocating for the past months for all senior levels to make sure that they intentionally pick up one person, at least one person that they can transfer their knowledge to. And that way we're going to shape African talents that are going to transform and change the world. But I also like to say that things are not gonna fall from the sky. And we need all of us to collectively say, okay, as an individual, what can I do to get this knowledge that I have, that I need? And there are tools you can find. There are lots of webinars. An institution such as ITM is already providing lots of training to eventually bridge the skills gap. I would say that there are a lot of webinars. Right now, there are lots of e-learning courses. Some are free, some are paying, but we need to use all those resources that are available. I don't think in the 21st century we can say that resources care. We have too much of it. Now, the problem is actually how do we filter what's needed for us and what's not.
Natalie?
Yeah, I think to piggyback on what she's saying, there's several layers. The first is a systems level, and I think higher education institutions have to really think through what value we're bringing. So I think in the future, as we're seeing, if you're competing with Coursera and the opportunities that are available for learning that are outside institutions, accredited institutions, you really have to look through what is the value addition we're offering. And I think that job numbers, people who are employed after they come to organizations, are critical. At Kepler, that's 90% of our students, and we track that to make sure that are employed after they graduate within 6 months. And we track that, and that has continued even through the pandemic, and the numbers have held, which means that what employers are looking for are those soft skills like Iris was talking about, and the ability to adapt and resilience, economic resilience, especially during uncertainty and pandemic, and we're going to see that in various ways going forward. So at a systems levels, higher education institutions really have to change their mindset. In addition to technical skills, we have to provide job readiness skills to make sure that our graduates are employed. And that's also for even technical and vocational training. I think for employers, we're competing for the best. And when you're competing for the best, you also have to be a great place to work. For me, implies two things. One, you are learning. You are promoting those who are learning, those who, and you coaching and mentoring is a part of what you measure for leaders and managers, and that's what I do myself. You have to be making sure that your team is growing as well as you're growing. There's also a level of thinking as well, how do we adapt our businesses and how do we prepare, whether it's reskilling or upskilling our staff, to make sure that we are also resilient as a business, as a company, and what that means in terms of learning. And I think for individuals in this time of uncertainty, what we're seeing is that it's critical. There's free resources that are available, and it's critical to take charge of your own professional development. And I think those are the three levels I would argue that there needs to be some change. And for at the moment,
Mr. James Kashumba, bring you into the conversation. Yours seems to be a harder job, being that what you lead and majority of your lessons need to be practical. Now, you're already faced with an industry whereby many look at it as second-tier education or third-tier education, where it doesn't seem to attract creme de la creme. Yet, this industry is greatly responsible for the bouncing back of major economies, Japan, Germany after World War II, just as examples. So how do you ensure that, one, you keep your students, two, attract new students, and three, have a mindset shift amongst your students?
Thank you, Arnold. I don't know if I missed one or two. There was an interruption in the internet, but I think I get the gist of your question. Yes, ours is Rwanda Polytechnic is a higher learning institution, but we also have oversight of TVET schools, so going down to secondary level. And yes, we recognize, not only us, but government, that really skills that are developed in technical schools and higher learning institutions, polytechnics, are the sorts of skills that are needed for industrial revolution, for transforming our economy, to make it a knowledge economy, but with hands-on skills, which unfortunately the education system that we inherited from our colonial masters did not put a lot of importance to. So our youngsters, well, not only youngsters, but even parents have overlooked this. And this is where Japan made right choices, Germany, and Korea, South Korea. They invested very much in getting technical education, or TVET, center stage, in order to make an economy that's a working economy. Now, what are we going to do about it? From one level, we need to influence the change of mind. And how do we do this? We have to go further down to our educational system, even down to primary school level, where our teachers start to recognize that every child is born with talent. And some of these talents are not what we'd call academic oriented. They are this type of skills that inborn, probably that kid who sits and is drawing when the teacher is talking and is looking out of the window. That's the kid that's supposed to be destined for TVET. They are innovative, they are creative, but probably they are not good listeners in terms of listening to the teacher. And we don't know how to harness those gifts early on in primary school and early secondary school. So we want to involve ourselves in influencing these mindsets or these attitudes very early on. Kids, there's no one who is stupid or born without talent. Everyone has talent. Yes, we have that tag of second tier education, poor cousin of universities, but we can change this. In Switzerland, 60-70% of the youngsters choose to go to TVET. They don't go there because they say, I failed to get the good marks. They go there because they've targeted that from early on. But to do that, it's really because we have to invest very heavily in creating attractive resources and infrastructure, smart classrooms, and all those things that make skills development, hands-on skills development, attractive and enjoyable for youngsters. So the first step is probably to invest heavily in TOT, training of teachers. Our teachers have to be very good at what they do. And in this day and age, they have to be good not only at what they do, but but also in the new technologies. They must be literate on the computer. They must know that the borders of countries are opening, therefore they must learn to speak different languages. They must know that they work beyond our normal borders. So these are things that at this moment may be thoughts, as you mentioned, they may look philosophical, but they are beginning. But we have already started investing. And as I mentioned, we are working together with UNESCO, trying to harness those resources from our development partners from across the world to see how these things can become available and to improve, to make teaching really an attractive vocational profession so that we attract the best teachers who are good at what they do. So I could go on, but I wonder whether that answers what you mentioned. Thank you.
It largely does. It largely does, Vice Chancellor. Thank you. Iris, you talked about placing 30 students or 30 young people looking for jobs within the past 6 months of COVID-19. Dr. James Kashumba is talking about 60 to 70% of people in countries like Switzerland going directly to TVET-centered education. How many of what I would call your clients or other human resource managers are looking at TVET-based skills for their institutions?
Thank you, Arnold. Some of the skills, we just talked about them, but I would maybe talk a little bit about the type of client that we received recently. And mostly we have been really focusing on training and coaching just graduates who had just finished university and hoping that they would get the first internship and they would get their first job, but unfortunately it's not happening for them. So what we're creating is an opportunity for them to have internship opportunities within different organizations. And we are also looking to partner with universities so that we can actually try to bridge the skills gap from before actually the students get out of university, because we realize that as Dr. just mentioned a little bit, some European countries or more developed countries, what they're doing is that they expose the students at a very, very young age. And that's where we need to shift as well to make sure that can a young student who's still 17 years old have an experience of what it feels like to work? Can they have an experience of what it feels like to not do what they're being taught in school only when they're passionate about something? How do we merge the passion that every individual has in them with the opportunities that can be given to them? Because most of the time we realize that we have a growing number of people who are dissatisfied at the workplace because what they're doing is not what they're meant to do. So what we're doing is reshaping and rechallenging what job seekers come to get from us and asking them, do you just need a job to pay the bills, or do you want something, a work that is going to enable you to be fulfilled and eventually even make an impact, as opposed to producing more and more talent who are just going to die because they're not in the field they're supposed to be in. So we realize more that the students, either graduates or job seekers that we have, are looking for just opportunities, and what we're challenging them is to acquire knowledge, to have self-confidence in them, to have public speaking skills, to have critical thinking and data analysis skills, because that's where the future of work is going to go. And we need people who are going actually to compete with technology, because look, technology is going to have, we are going to digitalize lots of services with artificial intelligence. We need people who can think like the machine does not. So that's where we're really challenging, and we hope that together with different stakeholders that we get to that goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iris. Now we're going to take a quick short break, and we're going to come back with the need to talk about investments in the education sector. Iris hinted on AI. I'm sure Natalie wants to dive in regards to AI and STEM investments and education investments overall. We are still with our panel of experts, and we're speaking about the future of work. Welcome back to the CNBC Africa panel special, and we are talking about the future of work. And with us is a distinguished panel of experts. Now, if you missed the first part, there was a lot of conversation on the current skill sets needed in tomorrow's workplace. And this is as a result of the current COVID-19 pandemic situation that we are being faced with. With us, just to reintroduce this panel of experts, is the Vice Chancellor of Rwanda Polytechnic, Mr. James Gashumba. We're also joined by Iris Irumva. She's the CEO of ITM Africa, a human resource company, and Natalie Munyapenda, who is the CEO of Kepler. And Natalie, I want to begin the second half of the show with you. Iris, as we went to the break, talked about AI, robotics, and the likes being crucial in the way that we are going to work in the future. And how is it possible that we are going to be able to balance the current workforce with the coming in of things like AI? Where do we need to train? What kind of investments are needed in today's education sectors?
Yeah, first I want to start by saying I think AI is not taking over our world. We're not going to lose jobs to AI just yet, at least not on the continent. I think what's critical is that we have to strengthen our investments in data science education, the research around AI, to make sure that we are not left behind and we're creating the technologies for the continent ourselves. But I think to come back to the investments in education that are needed, I think the Vice Chancellor already discussed that we need to invest in teachers. Teachers is not a profession that's going out of, that's going to be taken over by AI. So we need to make sure that we're investing in teachers at all levels, and especially at the younger levels, making sure that teaching is a competitive profession, that people want to be teachers. That's the first thing. Number two, we have to improve our education planning because we have to align our teaching, our curriculum, our pedagogy with the careers of the future. And as countries, we have to decide for ourselves which are the industries that we would like to continue to be competitive, to have competitive advantage, and to align our education needs and investments around the careers of the future for ourselves. That's number one. And at the moment, what we're seeing is that we're sort of kind of running behind. I think the Vice Chancellor talked about the fact that we had not invested in we had invested in the basic infrastructure, but we had not invested in the machines, the access to make sure that we're leveraging technology. And I think those are the things that we need to quickly improve and go all the way down to pre-primary, so nursery school. The other thing I want to talk about is the fact that I don't see, I think the Vice Chancellor talked a little bit about making sure that all the kids are seen to have an opportunity from very young age. But I think what we need to focus on is the fact that we need to make sure that we're valuing the various pathways and offering various pathways to young people very young. As they're talking about Switzerland and Germany, the pathways through technical school or university, those pathways are actually interchangeable. I might decide at some point, I started at a pathway going to university, and I realized actually I really like working with my hands, and I shift pathways. And so some of the basic skills remain, some of the soft skills that are required, innovation, those things are cut across, but the pathways should be interchangeable and should allow people to be able to be employable or to become entrepreneurs themselves. And I think that that's the challenge today.
Bring you back, Mr. James Gashumba, into the conversation. Natalie just spoke about the kind of investments that are needed, and she has downplayed AI and at least put those fears away in regards to people who are afraid that robots are coming for our jobs. Artificial intelligence is coming for our jobs. But in regards to TVET-based sectors, what do we think, or what is the right kind of investment that is needed to ensure that the students get the right skill sets for the jobs of the future?
Yes, Natalie was right. I don't think in sub-Saharan Africa our jobs are in danger. They will, and we must prepare our youngsters. So we mustn't put our head in the sand, but really for us, where we've reached in Rwanda, and the TVET training that we offer covers a whole large spectrum of skill sets. So if I'm training a carpenter at lower level, they have to be good at what they do with good machines, and as Iris said, also give them those other skill sets, which you would call adaptability, communication skills, being willing to learn on the job, and having a good attitude towards work, not despising work or doing work half-heartedly. So those are some of the things that we want to do, but we are mindful that the world is changing very fast, and we must prepare our young people for the world of tomorrow. And I think Natalie also mentioned about lifelong learning. So to prepare our youngsters. But in terms of investments, training the trainer is something we are focusing on. It's a big investment, and I'm glad to say that we have quite a number of partners, development partners working with us. But we have to look for funding well, let me put it this way. TVET is extremely expensive. You cannot compare it to traditional education, even at university. Extremely expensive, 3, probably 4 times more expensive, because you work with what we call consumables, the things that you have to work with. If you are learning plumbing, you must have those plumbing, pipes and all those things, cut them, join them, and then start another class with a whole set of new consumables, as we call them. So it's extremely expensive, and we've discussed with the government saying there has to be a special TVET funding model, which I'm glad to say our Minister of Education only submitted a proposal only last Friday. TVET funding model. How can we fund TVET here in Rwanda at our level of development? In Europe, in Germany, a lot of the cost is borne by industry. Here, our industry is still young. So you can't say, oh yeah, our youngsters will pick up, will learn with these, they must pick most of their skills at the workplace, because the workplace is still young. So the government has to invest. I spoke to a certain professor from I said, how did you do it? He said the government invested heavily to make, to invest in TVET, doing tax important. But for us, again, we have to invest in what we call smart classrooms, so that we start teaching in the modern ways of teaching. We cannot continue to do it the old way. Even a carpenter has to interact with computers in the way they teach. You would say, how does a carpenter or a mason, they have too. This is the world of the future. So I don't want to make it look like pie in the sky type of thing. It's achievable. We can start small, but gain as we go along. And we have many friends who are willing to work with us. So yes, the government is very positive, and we have many friends around the world who are coming. Even tomorrow, we are meeting with a delegation from Germany. The meeting will be chaired by our Minister of Education. And guess what we are going to be talking about? How are we going to be teaching post-COVID? What are the resources we need? Not just telling about our dreams, but what are the resources? What are the things that we need to do some investment? TVET funding model is a key, as far as I'm concerned, is a key to resolving the problem. Thank you, Arnold.
Natalie, I want to bring you back into the conversation in regards to what Mr. Gashumba is talking about. that, you know, there are partners out there and the money is there, but is the money really there? And if it's not there, where are we going to get the money that is needed to invest in our education systems and prep our workforce for the future?
So I think the money is there in some ways and can be found through strong partnerships between the private sector and the government and development partners. I think the issue there is our business models, whether it's the TVET business model, whether it's higher education business models, they're very poor. And I don't think they will survive post-COVID. We have to find ways to bring down our operational costs to make sure that the price that that students are paying for is reasonable, because now we're competing with online courses. We're competing with people who have really brought down the cost of education. I think that that's the main issue. You know, what is the price of our degrees or our offerings, and how can we bring down these costs to make sure that we are operationally sound and sustainable, but also that we're competitive and people want to come to us, because not only are we affordable, but we're also able to make sure our graduates are employable. But in terms of investments, the investments need to happen at every level. We're not investing enough in pre-primary, and we're not investing enough in teachers. By the time employers come in terms of training programs, etc., it's already where the investments are already, so we need to invest much earlier in the line, as well as the private sector should invest more into highly technical and highly research-based opportunities.
Iris, if I'm to bring you back into the conversation, let's imagine you've been given a blank check and say 2020 has been, you're one person who 2020 has been really good to. Where would you put that blank check? In what part of the education sector would you invest your money?
Honestly speaking, I would totally put it in primary. The reason being that when we have a strong foundation, everything we build on can be sustainable. What we're trying to do right now is reshape, or the foundation has probably not been equipped to challenge or to keep us ahead of what's coming. And what we need now, instead of trying to make a quick fix, because there isn't such a thing as a quick fix, I would totally take it to primary, so that within a couple of years to come, we can have a developed Africa, an Africa that is going to be not what we always see in the Western world, but an Africa made by African solutions. So I'll totally put it first in primary.
Primary education is where you would put it. Mr. James Kashumba, in your closing remarks, where do you think the future of the education sector is headed, at least in the short term? And here we're talking about 2 to 4 years period of time.
Thanks, Arnold, and thanks to my colleagues as well. The future of education. Here in Rwanda, we've talked a lot about education because it continues to be the sector that's lagging behind our success story. And we always debate about it. Why is it that we are achieving highly in other indices, but when it comes to education, we lag behind, which is a shame, really. And teacher education, training of trainers. So you asked Iris about the blank check. She didn't leave anything for me for the TVET, but in primary education, I agree, is extremely important. Early childhood and primary education. And to start saying, really, any educational system is as good as its faculty, as its teachers. And if you invest in developing a very strong teaching career structure, so that people like in Singapore or Korea, They say, if you are very gifted, if you are very bright, you say, I want to be a teacher. To me, that's extremely important. Other things are really going around, scratching around the corners, investing in teachers, remunerating them very well, training them very well. But again, as Iris said, it really begins even lower at secondary school. If you give people a very good education very early on, then you've started solving the problem. So Singapore spends 20% of their budget, even now, on education. We have to do likewise and make sure that TVET, of course, is among those. And when we say education, but TVET has to have a very good percentage of that 20 or whatever percentage. Thank you.
Iris, Mr. James Kashumba doesn't seem to be happy that you're not giving him any part of that paycheck. But where do you think the future of your industry, human resource in particular, is headed in the short term?
Okay, thank you, Arnold. First of all, I would like to send my apologies to Vice Chancellor and Natalie, because they could possibly feel that I'm not leaving anything for them. But obviously, if I have one blank check, the best idea, honestly, would be to divide it. I like your answer, and I think it's the smartest to be able to invest in teachers, because if we invest in teachers across all levels, they're able to give the best to students. But obviously, we know that it's much more difficult and to share accordingly, but eventually I think the smartest way would be to really invest in students. Now, in terms of human resources, where we're heading in the short term is having a digital HR. It has started before COVID, and it has been enhanced again by the COVID season. And I'm sure that you've heard more of e-recruitment, e-learning, etc. So we're working towards improving and digitalizing lots of services. And that way we're going to have really employees remain at the core of all the businesses. We're going to have a human-centered HR, but very based, data-based, and also we're going to see in the future that technology, when we're embracing with the ideas and smart people that we have around us, it can really be something sustainable to help and boost our businesses. So for anyone who's looking forward to getting into the workplace, I would say really embrace the digital world. It's not going to replace humans or employees, not at all. I know this is a myth that we need to share more and more with the people who listen to us, because people are not going anywhere. All we do for the people, and if the people are going to remain at the center of it. However, we need to marry the digital, the skills that we have, and the intelligence of human. Thank you.
Very strong insights there coming from you, Iris. Natalie, as we are in your closing remarks, where do you think the future of work and workforce is headed?
Yes, I think a few things. One, we have to revise business models. Higher education institutions, training institutions have to revise their business model to stay nimble and to be able to operate at lower costs and offer high quality education. So that's where we need to be headed. Number two, we need to rethink the pathways that we have coming into higher education and make them agile so that people can go between TVET and traditional universities, as well as training programs that take them directly from high school to employment. I think we have to rethink how we prepare our students for remote employment, and we need to rethink how we invest in education, particularly strengthening our planning to align to national needs. And so there needs to also be planning at the national level about our careers in the future. I think that the point about teachers is critical, and we will never get ahead of how well we treat our teachers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for those strong remarks as well, Natalie. That was Natalie Munyampenda. She is the CEO of Kepler, based out of here in Kigali. We also had Iris Irumva, who is the Managing Director of ITM Africa, and the Vice Chancellor of Rwanda Polytechnic, Mr. James Gashumba. Our conversation today was on the future of work and tomorrow's workforce in possibly a post-COVID-19 world. Now, do you want to be part of this conversation? Tweet us at CNBC Africa, or you could tag me directly at The Real Quizera. Have a great rest of your day.